Hello and welcome. My name is Courtney Bailey, and I serve as an instructional designer and an instructor of English at the University of South Carolina. I also serve as the Intensive English Programs Coordinator with NAFSA, Association of International Educators, which is the largest nonprofit association dedicated to international education and exchange. It is always a pleasure to connect with the ELSAA team and continue these important conversations surrounding English language assessment, access, transparency, and the future of English proficiency testing. In today's conversation, we'll take a closer look at ELSAA's approach to English language assessment, the evidence and standards guiding their work, and some of the broader challenges and questions currently shaping the field. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. Karen, to begin, could you tell us more about the evidence-based framework that ELSAA is adopting to support its clients in strengthening the quality, validity, security, and fairness of English language testing?
Yes, of course, and lovely to see you again, Courtney. So the framework that will soon be previewed on our website, so englishlsa.com, is grounded in some of the key principles then of language testing. So, for example, the test construct, how the test is put together, a careful review of the test items themselves. So, from the perspectives of accessibility, cultural difference, real life applicability, which is really important. So authenticity of the tasks, how the test is delivered and whether this balances user needs and practicality for the test taker, a review of marking and reliability, assessments of the balance between length, cost, and other such practical considerations, as well as the extent to which the tests have been regulated and mapped to international benchmarks, such as then the Common European Framework of Reference. We'll then be using this framework to adapt it to the needs of our clients, about whom, hopefully, with their permission, we'll share more about this in a future episode.
Great. And just a follow-up question to that, what makes this framework distinct from existing approaches already in the field?
I think what we're really looking to do with this is to bring all that information really together in one place. At the moment, if you're looking for information on tests, this information will be out there, but you're going to have to go and look to each of the different test providers, look at the research that's been published, all of these different things. And what we're really looking to do is to bring all of that information together so when universities or professional bodies are looking for information on tests, they can see all of these different features compared in one framework, in one place.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that overview because I do think that institutions are looking for greater clarity and regarding standards and evidence and what they should actually be relying upon. And
Mhm.
having it in one space would be enormously helpful. So thank you for that. But Sandy, building on that point, could you elaborate more on the documentary evidence, the research base, and quality assurance standards that ELSA will draw upon in formulating the advice provided to the clients on English language assessment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And that's a really, I think, important question because if we remind ourselves, one of the reasons that ELSA was actually created in the first place is because universities were telling us consistently from wherever they were in the world that they felt they were really making decisions on high stakes tests without really a clear, independent evidence base. So everything that we're trying to achieve at ELSA is to ensure that it's grounded in documentation, research, and recognised quality standards, not just someone's opinion or preference, let's say. So the framework that Karen alluded to, it's really a review of the test or to give advice. So we're really looking, as we've touched upon, things that are already in the public domain, but perhaps not as easy to access or even more interpret. And this includes testing bodies having their own technical manuals, their validity and reliability studies. We hear a lot about research, but where is it actually housed? And how are scores mapped and set? The other thing is looking at using structured evaluation rubrics as well, that will look at things also such as security, malpractice controls, standard setting, and also the way in which the test is actually delivered. So really wanting to provide advice that's consistent, transparent, but also that can be used if ever scrutinized by external or internal organizations. So Karen mentioned the Common European Framework of Reference and the Canadian Language Benchmark. These are really important to supplement, I guess, the work that's being done. And then we also touched upon test comparison studies, and this is really also very key and critical when undertaking such an exercise. So a lot of colleagues around the world don't really realize that for many of these major testing providers that they have mapped against each other, but this is largely because of requirements in certain parts of the world, such as the Australian Department of Home Affairs. These are really helpful, valuable studies for anyone that's setting entry requirements across multiple tests, because they really do help you understand what a comparable score looks like. However, there is a however, and this is important. We really do encourage at ELSAA institutions to treat such comparisons with a little bit of caution. And you may be wondering why. This is because essentially they're produced by the testing companies themselves, and sometimes they could be based on older versions of a test. So they are a helpful data point, but they shouldn't, in our opinion, for what it's worth, be the only data point that's used. So, a takeaway there is please use them, but don't rely on them blindly. And Karen's mentioned, the benchmarks. There's a few other things that we will be utilising for this. One of which is also a good practice guide, which has been put together by an organisation called Bali Bwila. And this is a really great resource for the sector, irrespective of wherever you're sat, because of the step-by-step framework that they've also put together, when you're assessing English language. And then kind of a final couple of things to draw upon as well is that we will look very carefully at the established assessment literature that's out there, whether that's validity theory, predictability, but we would also be asking our testing bodies for any other information that perhaps we haven't got that we really want to use. And then finally, we'll also be keeping an eye on any emerging evidence, especially the kind of the remote testing element of it. So the scoring in terms of remote tests, the identity assurance, because I'm sure you'll agree, the landscape's changing so quickly that institutions need a body like ELSAA to really help also translate that into practical implications. So this isn't just about the test itself, it's also about improving student outcomes and also reducing any institutional risk. And I think I'll stop there.
Well, that's all a lot of great information, and I would like to ask a follow-up question to that. And so I wonder if you could tell me, how should institutions responsibly interpret discrepancies across benchmark systems?
I think the first thing is the benchmarks that they're looking at, whether that is the CEFR or if it's the Canadian language framework, is to actually understand the frameworks themselves. So we often get, and I remember this myself, it's equivalent to a B2, but really how many people really have got the time and do actually have an understanding of what that means? What is a student able to do and not be able to do? So I think that's a starting point, is understanding the actual frameworks themselves, and then looking at does that equate to a B2? Will that student be successful?
Exactly. What's in a descriptor? What's in a score? I
Yes.
get that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Stephen, I'll go ahead and direct this next question to you. Could you elaborate on some of the most significant emerging challenges facing users of English language tests and how institutions, regulators, and assessment providers can best prepare to respond to them?
Yeah, it's a big question, Courtney. Referring back to what Sandy has just said, though, it's really about the fact that the landscape is changing so quickly, and particularly in relation to technology. Things are not standing still. Technology, the developments in artificial intelligence are literally changing every day. And therefore, it's a really complex environment for test score users to be able to interpret. And especially if they have limited time, resource, or skill to put into all of this, it's really becoming quite a minefield. Some of the major challenges we see coming up are first around marking or scoring. So do organizations actually have clarity and transparency on the marking methods being used for the different tests they rely on? And are these consistent, A, with the standards they expect, but also B, with the standards they apply in their own assessments or their in-course assessments? What are the implications if they aren't? And a key example here is misperceptions on whether tests keep humans in the loop or not, i.e., whether tests actually have some human element in the marking or scoring. Regardless of whether that's right or wrong, I have noticed recently that several test score users thought that the tests they are accepting are human marked, and it was the reverse. They're completely AI marked without humans in the loop, and also vice versa. There's some test score users I've spoken to who thought that particular tests were all AI marked, but in fact they had a human element and a human intervention. So it speaks to the framework that Karen was talking about that we're trying to put together to try to provide some clarity and transparency for everybody who has to make decisions about tests. And the other one, which of course you may have read a lot about online and in socials, is around online testing or at-home testing, as it's called.
Yes.
And again, without making a judgment on this, do organizations accepting scores have clarity on the pros and cons of assessments in test centers and assessments that could be done at home? It's an area of debate. It becomes more complex every day as the AI becomes more complex with different views. And I would argue a lack of open source evidence and documentation about this. Again, it's difficult because it changes all the time, but one that needs to be considered from a whole range of angles. Some of these are, I mean, there's many. Some include access, so it can be argued that an at-home test can support geographical access for people who can't reach a test center. But what does it do for cost of test, or what does it do for people who are unfamiliar with the whole computer and IT setup technology paraphernalia? Does it provide access to them? Then there's the area around special needs or accessibility. Some at-home tests will have some accommodations for people with additional requirements. Some won't, but also there are particular types of accommodations that are best provided in a test center because they're not yet possible to translate into the online environment. There are others. Cultural bias is one. Does at-home testing, does it in fact reinforce biases, cultural biases? Is it easier for people of particular backgrounds or not? Which then in turn throws up a question of fairness. Then there's also the question of data protection. To what extent is data protection? To what extent is our data and the video of our test, is that more secure if it's been done at home or in a test center? Frequency is that said, frequency is clearly a potential advantage for at-home tests because it means that the test can usually be done whenever the test taker needs to take the test, and sometimes people are just not available to take tests at the times that they are set in test centers. I mean, I could go on, Courtney. Internet capacity, is it fair then that people with is it fair that people with low income or low, yeah, or how can I put it, a home environment that doesn't provide a quiet space? Is it fair then that they're not able to take an at-home test, whereas somebody who has great internet and a big house is able to take an at-home test?
Yeah.
We could go on and on and on, but I think what we do believe at ELSA is that there's a duty incumbent both on the test score users themselves and on the test providers to provide the information to be as transparent as possible about all of these things, about the pros and the cons, so that the test score users can actually see through the spin.
Exactly. I could tell that Elsa's doing the deep work, right? The deep thinking, because you've brought up, and I was making notes as you were speaking. So, data protection, fairness, AI, frequency, remote testing, transparency, biases, and accessibility. And so that's a lot. And so, you kind of actually answered a part of this question, but I want to see if we can go a little bit further. So, what conversations should institutions be having internally right now that maybe they're not? Can you speak on that a little bit before we move on?
I think that's a great question. Um, I, I wonder if it's as simple as um, asking the question, do they have they got the right skills, resource, and time available to be able to do a review of their English language test policy? And uh, and do they have are the right people from the organization, are the right people in the room feeling empowered to be able to participate in that exercise? It could be that simple as, what, when, and who. Before even moving on to all of these questions, if an organization is not in a position to be able to review its test policy with all of these different changes going on, then I think that to me raises a red flag.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much. And Mir, we will continue on with you. So, looking ahead, how do you see the future of English language testing evolving over the next few years, particularly in relation to technology security and changing expectations in the field?
Uh, Thank you so much, Courtney. It's a great question here. I think looking ahead, I see the future of English language testing will be evolving around three key areas: technology, trust, and candidate experience. So technology will drive more AI-enabled, adaptive, and flexible testing with faster results and more personalized customer journeys. And at the same time, trust will become even more important, particularly around security, identity verification, test integrity as remote testings continue to grow. And as my colleague Stephen mentioned, when people going towards remote testing, are we ensuring about equality, diversity? Not everybody will have the similar facility at home. So how we can address that? So that is, one very important aspect for remote testing. Candidate experience will be a major focus. People will increasingly expect that assessment will be convenient, fair, and reflective of the real world communication skills. So testing provider will need to ensure that they're balancing the innovation, technology with accessibility, fairness, and credibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that response. And I'll open this last question up to anyone. What gives you the greatest optimism about the future of assessment? And I know that's a big question, so I'll ask while you're thinking, I'll repeat it one more time. But once again, what gives you the greatest optimism about the future of assessment right now?
I can start off, Courtney, and perhaps other colleagues may have, more ideas. I think it's actually the caliber and the enthusiasm of so many people in the sector, the test providers, the test score users, teachers, counselors, agents. There's so many people who are interested in this story, which in this book, which is still being written. Um, so that's one thing.
Great. Anyone else before we close
I,
it out?
I think to build on to what Stephen has said there, I think some of the conversations that we've been having since we set up ELSAA with test providers, with bodies, with universities, is really building on that. What Stephen has just said is that willingness and need to come together to ensure a better experience for the test takers, and to really fulfil that duty of care. And so hopefully we can have greater collaboration and cooperation to increase the openness and transparency in this space, for everyone concerned. So that's really quite a strong positive we've taken away from many of the meetings that we've been in.
Yeah, I was going to say, without repeating what Steve and Karen have said, I think it's also a greater alignment and ensuring that we all have a vested interest in ensuring that we the institutions that we support provide good student outcomes at the end of the day. That's really important. So obviously accepting the right test, setting the right score, being really fair is really important. But we've definitely started to build a bit of momentum, and we're, as Karen said, we're really taken back by the support that we're getting in terms of everyone wanting to kind of join us on this journey.
Well, I think what stands out throughout this discussion in English language assessment is that it's not simply about selecting a test, right? There are so many things to consider, and institutions are being asked to think critically about transparency and equity and accessibility and fairness and all the things that you guys just spoke about. So I love that you're already ahead of the game and thinking deeply for them, as we, make our way towards the future. So I would like to sincerely thank you for continuing the conversation with us today and for sharing your insights and perspectives. And of course, thank you to everyone joining us for Coffee with Courtney. We look forward to continuing the discussion, perhaps in another episode. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. How did that feel?